SPQR. Four simple letters yet haunting, stitched into the very foundation of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. You've seen them, on crumbling ruins swallowed by time, on ancient coins darkened by blood and fire, in Hollywood's epic portrayals of Roman glory. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about Rome, its power, its greatness, its patriotism, was built on a lie? That SPQR never truly represented the Roman people. That it was never a symbol of democracy as we've been led to believe, but rather a carefully engineered tool of control, like a dagger hidden beneath a senator's robe. SPQR wasn't a pledge. It was a mask, a psychological weapon, a golden curtain draped over rooms filled with blood and conspiracy. Now picture this, a banner inscribed with Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, fluttering above a plaza soaked in corpses. A law signed SPQR, but written by the hand of a tyrant. A coin stamped with SPQR, used to pay mercenaries to crush farmers in revolt. A stone wall carved with SPQR hiding behind it, the empire's torture chambers. Do you see it now? SPQR was never faith. It was the shadow of faith. For over 1,000 years, Rome's rulers cloaked themselves in the robe of SPQR to hide their true nature. Caesar, Augustus, Nero. None of them destroyed the symbol. They used it to sanctify their sins. Because when a lie is repeated long enough, it becomes tradition, it becomes legend, and eventually it becomes law. But this isn't just a story about Rome. It's part of the larger tale, the entire history of the Roman Empire, where myth and manipulation often danced in plain sight. It's the story of every civilization that ever believed a symbol could speak truth. It's the story of power, of fear, of how people surrender their freedom, not with shackles, but with applause, lulled by symbols they no longer dare to question. And today on Shadows of Ancient History, we're going to rip the golden mask wide open. We'll dive beneath the marble and the monuments to uncover one of the greatest deceptions history ever engraved. SPQR wasn't an honor, it was a sentence, written in stone and signed in submission. So are you ready to uncover the truth that Rome spent centuries trying to bury? Welcome to Shadows of Ancient History, where we don't just tell stories, we unravel the myths that empires were built upon. Today we'll strip away the marble shine, dig through the ruins, and peel back the golden veneer to expose the dark secret behind Rome's most enduring illusion, SPQR. It began humbly. After the fall of the Roman kings in 509 BCE, a new order rose, one that claimed to give power back to the people. The Senatus Populusque Romanus, or SPQR, emerged not as a battle cry but as a pact. The Senate and the people of Rome bound together in shared governance. Or so it seemed. In its earliest use, SPQR appeared on military standards and official documents, marking decisions supposedly made in harmony between the patricians and plebeians. But historians still debate whether this was truly democratic or just a clever illusion. The Senate, composed of Rome's aristocracy, held nearly all power, while the voice of the people was filtered through layers of political choreography. Cato the Elder once marched under the letters, but the question remains, who did he represent, the masses or the masters? The term SPQR spread across public spaces, engraved on civic buildings, chiseled onto the sides of aqueducts, etched into bronze standards carried into battle. To the average Roman citizen, it gave a sense of belonging. To the Senate, it was a psychological anchor binding obedience to a shared identity, even as control quietly consolidated into fewer hands. And that's where the illusion began. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome had begun its crawl beyond the Tiber, absorbing neighboring tribes. With each conquest, SPQR was not just a label, it became a brand. A message: we are Rome. You are now us. But this branding was not consensual. It was etched after the battles were won, not before the treaties were signed. And as Rome expanded, the phrase became a tool not of unity, but of domination. A lesser-known episode from this period reveals the cracks beneath the symbol's polished face. In 326 BCE, the Lex Poetelia abolished debt bondage, but only after mounting unrest and the threat of civil collapse. It was a populist gesture branded with SPQR approval, but in reality it was a calculated concession by elites to preserve the illusion of order. The people believed they had won a moral victory. The Senate knew they had prevented a rebellion. Even stranger was the ritual of devotio, where a Roman general would vow his own life to the gods in exchange for victory. In these moments, he would invoke SPQR, offering his death on behalf of the people. But what truly died was the line between religious sacrifice and state propaganda. By the 3rd century BCE, the phrase had become so ubiquitous that its original meaning was beginning to blur. It no longer described a system. It described a mythology. SPQR stood above the law, beyond the people it claimed to represent. It became divine. Inscriptions began appearing not only on civic buildings, but in temples and religious rites. The phrase migrated from the marketplace to the altar. The Senate, Rome's most political body, now spoke with sacred authority. And as Rome's republic began to tremble under the weight of its own ambition, SPQR remained still, carved into stone and bronze, like an oath that could not be broken. But beneath the symbol, fault lines were spreading, because SPQR wasn't built to bend, it was built to bind. And soon, it would be used to mask the end of the very republic it claimed to protect. It began as a whisper, then a roar. Rome, once confined to the hills surrounding the Tiber, became a hungry leviathan crawling across the Mediterranean. And as its appetite grew, so did the reach of 4 letters SPQR. By the time Rome had subjugated Carthage and set its sights eastward, SPQR adorned everything. Coin standards, city gates, even the gravestones of soldiers who had never seen the Senate, nor felt the supposed will of the people. It had become a banner of conquest, projecting legitimacy wherever Rome marched. The irony: most of the people who bled under that banner never voted, never petitioned the Senate, never had their voice heard. As provinces fell under Roman control, SPQR became less a declaration of civic unity and more a stamp of ownership. It marked territories not with democracy but with dominion. Scholars describe this era as the age of imperial republicanism, a contradiction, but one that Rome embraced wholeheartedly. The republic still lived in name, but it ruled like an empire. In Gaul, after Caesar's brutal campaigns, he inscribed SPQR over captured cities, suggesting they had been brought into the fold. But what really happened was slaughter, slavery, and forced assimilation. The Senate, far removed from these frontiers, proved the conquest post facto, lending the illusion of collective will. Historians still debate whether this qualified as a democracy at all, or simply oligarchic expansion masked in popular language. And the people, they were given bread and spectacle. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses, was more than a slogan. It was a strategy. While SPQR adorned the walls of the Colosseum, inside beasts and men were sacrificed for applause. The message was subtle but clear: look at what your republic gives you. Entertainment, stability, glory, all in your name. But behind the curtain, the Senate began to rot. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, tried to reclaim the original spirit of SPQR. They argued that the Senate had betrayed the people, that land reform and economic justice were not only righteous but necessary. Their speeches stirred crowds. Their reforms threatened the elite, and so they were killed. Not by barbarians, not by foreign enemies, but by Rome itself, by senators who claimed to act in the name of SPQR. It was then that the symbol began to fracture. Because if SPQR meant the Senate and the people of Rome, how could the Senate murder the people's champions and still claim legitimacy? A strange moment from this time illustrates the dissonance. After Tiberius Gracchus was beaten to death by senators using broken benches, the Senate held a public feast the next day. The banners above them read SPQR. The people below grieved, but the marble letters did not change. Symbols, after all, don't bleed. As the 1st century BCE unfolded, the Republic began to devour itself. Faction turned against faction, generals marched on Rome, and civil war erupted. Yet SPQR remained, its letters carefully maintained on every edifice, every coin, every decree. It no longer described governance, it described mythology. Take the curious case of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. After marching on Rome with his private army, a flagrant violation of republican law, he declared himself dictator, re publicae constituendis a causa dictator, for the purpose of restoring the republic. He then murdered his enemies, purged the Senate, and restructured the Constitution. All of this officially was done under the authority of SPQR and the people they watched. Some cheered, Others feared, but none could deny that the phrase had begun to shift. It was no longer a statement of shared governance. It was a shield held up by tyrants, waved by generals, blessed by priests. A deeper layer emerged in the funerary monuments of this era. Senators who died in disgrace still had SPQR carved into their tombs, as if proximity to the symbol could erase guilt. And in the forum stone tablets declaring new laws were signed not by individuals, but by the will of SPQR. No author, no signature, just the voice of an invisible machine. This was the age of marble silence, a time when the words on the walls said one thing, but the blood on the floor said something else. Because the symbol was no longer just a reflection of Rome's structure, it was a smokescreen for its unraveling. And as a young upstart named Gaius Julius Caesar began to rise, SPQR would soon face its most dangerous transformation yet. By the time Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, SPQR had already lost its soul. He knew it. So did the Senate. And the people, they had grown used to shadows. Caesar did not defy SPQR, he spoke in its name. That was his genius. He didn't tear down the symbol, he wrapped himself in it. As his legions marched on Rome, their standards still bore those four sacred letters, SPQR. And when he seized power, he claimed to do so for the Republic. That was the magic trick. He made dictatorship look like duty. After defeating Pompey and consolidating power, Caesar had the Senate appoint him dictator, perpetuo dictator for life. But in public, the charade of SPQR continued. Coins were minted bearing his image, but still stamped with the phrase. Laws were passed with the Senate's rubber stamp, and beneath every decree, Senatus Populusque Romanus. Historians still debate whether Caesar believed in restoring the Republic or simply played the part to perfection. But one thing is clear, he didn't destroy the SPQR. He used it as a mask. And after his assassination on the Ides of March, the mask remained. What followed was not a restoration of the Republic, but a slow, calculated death. The ensuing power vacuum was filled by Caesar's adopted son, Gaius Octavius, known to history as Augustus. He would become the first emperor of Rome. But he never called himself that. Instead, he called himself Princeps First Citizen, not king, not emperor, just one among many. And once again, SPQR stood beside him like a loyal dog. Augustus mastered the art of illusion. He preserved the Senate. He preserved elections. He even staged debates. But behind the scenes, power was his and his alone. The Senate became a theater. The people became an audience. And the Republic became memory. This was the birth of what scholars call the veiled monarchy, a regime where imperial power was hidden behind republican symbols, and SPQR was its crown jewel. Consider this strange paradox. During Augustus's reign, the use of SPQR actually increased. It appeared more frequently on buildings, monuments, and coins than ever before. Why? Because the more the Republic faded, the more its symbols were needed to mask the silence. On the Arapacis, a lavish altar to peace built by Augustus SPQR is carved into the marble, as if to say this peace belongs to all of us. But it was not a peace forged by public will. It was a peace enforced by imperial control. Even the imperial guard, the Praetorian, bore standards marked with SPQR, though they served the emperor alone. It was as if the Republic had become a ghost, haunting the very empire that had buried it. And the Senate, it clapped. It blessed. It named Augustus father of the country under the seal of SPQR. One lesser-known ritual speaks volumes. Each year on the anniversary of Rome's founding, a ceremonial ox was sacrificed in the forum. Senators in full regalia recited prayers to Jupiter, ending each with an invocation of SPQR. Yet by this time, most senators were appointed by the emperor, and their prayers, like their votes, were scripted. Still, the people believed, or they pretended to. Because SPQR was not just carved in stone, it was carved in memory. Even during scandals like the exile of the poet Ovid or the rumored poisoning of rivals, SPQR remained untouched. No matter who fell, the letters endured. Augustus's successors would inherit this dance. Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, each would rule with unchecked power, while still issuing laws and punishments in the name of SPQR. One curious moment occurred during Nero's reign. After a fire devastated Rome in 64 CE, He blamed the Christians and ordered mass executions in the name of restoring order under SPQR. It wasn't just cruelty, it was branding, a way to remind the people your suffering is sanctioned because your symbol approves it. By now, the letters no longer connected the Senate and the people. They connected the emperor to his mask. And that mask had become beautiful, eternal, untouchable. Even as marble cracked and men were broken, the letters remained. By the 2nd century CE, Rome had reached the height of its territorial glory. From the windswept shores of Britannia to the deserts of Arabia, one banner echoed across the continents, SPQR. But beneath the bronze eagles and marble triumphs, something else was happening. The Republic was long dead, yet the symbol lived on, polished, replicated, glorified. Not to reflect power shared, but power mythologized. SPQR had become the language of propaganda. Nowhere was this more visible than in architecture. Temples, forums, arches, baths, every stone told a story, and that story was branded. The Arch of Titus, built to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, depicted Roman soldiers carrying spoils from the Jewish temple. Above them, the inscription, Senatus Populusque Romanus. But the Senate had nothing to do with the campaign, nor had the Roman people voted for it. The war had been ordered by Emperor Vespasian and carried out by his son Titus. SPQR wasn't truth, it was gloss, a beautiful falsehood engraved in triumphal stone. This was the genius of Roman messaging. Symbols didn't just reflect reality, they shaped it. Public festivals were choreographed displays of unity. When gladiators spilled blood in the Colosseum, the crowds cheered beneath SPQR emblazoned banners. The message: your empire entertains you. Your republic gives you glory, even when that glory came dressed in horror. One strange episode during the reign of Emperor Domitian speaks to the unsettling loyalty to symbol over substance. Domitian, a tyrant known for paranoia and purges, built a massive equestrian statue of himself in the Forum, with SPQR prominently carved on the pedestal. According to later reports, some senators who had been marked for execution laid wreaths at the base, hoping the symbol would protect them. It didn't. Still, they bowed to the letters, because SPQR now carried a mythos more powerful than law. Scholars have called this phenomenon symbolic inertia, when an idea persists long after its original function dies simply because people no longer know how to imagine the world without it. Even emperors could be replaced. But SPQR, it was sacred. Hadrian, known for his introspective nature and love of Greek philosophy, tried to soften Rome's harsher edges. He visited provinces personally dressed like a citizen and spoke of unity. But when he commissioned the Pantheon's reconstruction, the inscription still read, "Built by the will of SPQR." Yet Hadrian's will alone made it happen. As centuries passed, the Senate became increasingly ceremonial. Its debates staged its authority symbolic. Real power lay with the emperor and the legions. And still, SPQR adorned every edifice like a ghost refusing to leave the stage. Coins minted under Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, continued the tradition. Though he penned meditations on duty, justice, and mortality, even he did not discard the lie. His denarii bore his image on one side, and SPQR on the other. The face of a man, the mask of an ideal. Then came the crisis of the 3rd century, when emperors rose and fell like waves. Civil wars erupted, borders collapsed, the empire fractured. But through famine, plague, and rebellion, the letters persisted. One eerie event occurred in 260 CE when Emperor Valerian was captured alive by the Persians. It was a humiliation Rome had never known. And yet in the aftermath, SPQR was carved into a monument commemorating his courage, not his defeat. This was not history. This was narrative control. Even as the empire grew weary, exhausted by its own weight, the machinery of image continued. Public inscriptions listed grain doles, victories, laws, all signed with the authority of SPQR. But who believed it anymore? The people perhaps no longer trusted the Senate, but they still trusted the letters. And that more than anything reveals the triumph of the symbol. SPQR had been weaponized, romanticized, and ritualized. It had served oligarchs, emperors, generals, and bureaucrats. It had justified taxes, crucifixions, slavery, and war. It had been whispered in prayer and screamed from podiums. And all the while it had remained unchallenged. Because SPQR didn't just survive history, it shaped how history was remembered. It was Rome's final illusion etched not only in stone, but in the minds of men who could no longer tell where the symbol ended and the empire began. Rome eventually fell, not with a cataclysmic crash, but with 1,000 quiet fractures. By the late 5th century, CE barbarians had entered the gates, the legions were scattered, and the Senate had become a shadow of its former self. And yet, SPQR was still there, carved into the stones of temples, etched on weathered coins, whispered in liturgies that no longer remembered their origin. The Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE when the child emperor Romulus Augustus was deposed. But even then, in the dusty corners of a broken city, the letters lived on. A few administrators kept the rights. Monuments were repaired, statues cleaned, not because anyone believed the Republic still existed, but because they feared what the world might become without the story it had always told itself. And that story was SPQR. The strange part, the symbol did not die with the empire, it mutated. In the Middle Ages, as popes rose in spiritual power, and the Holy Roman Empire claimed descent from Caesar, SPQR was revived again, this time as a relic of imagined continuity. The Commune of Rome in the 12th century adopted the phrase to legitimize its fragile rule long after the actual Senate was no more than ceremonial dust. During the Renaissance, the letters reappeared on coats of arms, facades, frescoes. Artists, scholars, and rulers reached back through time not to resurrect the Republic, but to borrow its aura. SPQR became shorthand for order, sophistication, legacy. Even fascist regimes in the 20th century invoked it, claiming to restore Roman greatness. Mussolini, in particular, emblazoned SPQR on manhole covers, public buildings, and military insignia, believing that to wear the letters was to inherit their power. But SPQR, stripped from its original context, had become an empty vessel. It could mean whatever the powerful wanted it to mean. And that's the lingering truth. SPQR was never fixed. It was always flexible, a symbol that claimed to unite but was used to divide, a mask for democracy but often a mouthpiece for control. Even in modern times, echoes remain. In Washington, D.C., Latin inscriptions crown the marble facades of federal buildings. The eagle, Rome's most enduring military emblem, soars above American flags. Legal frameworks, senates, forums, republics, all inspired by the same civilization that once proclaimed SPQR with every chisel stroke. Historians still debate whether America is Rome's true heir or its cautionary tale. Some see SPQR as a relic of civic pride, others as a warning label in plain sight. But one fact remains: no empire ever saw itself as an empire. They all claim to act in the name of the people. And that's what makes SPQR so dangerous. Because once a symbol becomes sacred, it can justify anything. War, silence, sacrifice, the rewriting of history. SPQR was not just a motto, it was a mirror. And in that mirror, every generation since Rome has seen what it wanted to see. The Senate and the people, perhaps once. But more often, just the shadow of a promise that was never truly kept. SPQR. 4 letters once carved in marble, now barely a whisper across time. They no longer belong to ancient Rome. They belong to memory, to us. Because symbols don't vanish when empires crumble. Even across the entire history of the Roman Empire, they linger. They shift. They wait for a new empire, a new lie, a new generation. Silence, sacrifice, willing to believe. For centuries, SPQR claimed to unite the Senate and the people, to promise justice, order, and shared power. But history whispers a different truth, that the symbol often served not to uplift, but to soften obedience, not to protect freedom, but to dignify control. And yet the letters remain, shining quietly on flags, buildings, books, as if they never left, as if the illusion still matters. So what does that say about us? Maybe we still crave the comfort of ancient stories. Maybe we still look to stone and legend for meaning. Or maybe we are still living beneath symbols we no longer understand. So the next time you see those letters, SPQR, don't just admire the ruin. Don't just marvel at the empire. Pause, listen, and remember, sometimes the most enduring empires are built not with armies, but with the silence we keep around symbols. And sometimes the mask we inherit is the one we forget we're wearing.